The Arizona Territory held its breath beneath a dry, relentless heat that refused to fade even after the sun bled out behind the rust-colored mesas. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It was late summer 1879, a time when the desert's furnace only dimmed for a few hours before dawn fanned its fire again. The wind, when it stirred, carried no comfort, just the weary sigh of the desert itself, laced with dust, and the faintest whisper of far-off rain. Stone towers of red rock loomed under a sky scattered with stars, the bones of an ancient world that had once drowned beneath an ocean. Cole Redhawk moved through that vast stillness like a shadow born of it, not a stranger to the land, but a living part of it. The soft soles of his moccasins read the desert floor like a story sand, shifting beneath him, shale snapping sharp underfoot. 30 years had carved his face with sun and wind, and his eyes held the patience of a man who had learned that silence in this land was its own language. Once he had worn the blue jacket of an army scout, leading white soldiers through a country they could never truly understand. He had learned their tongue, their ways, and the emptiness that haunted their gaze. Then he left it all behind, trading the stale bread of the forts for the freedom of the wild and the hard work of catching mustangs. Every horse sold was a step closer to his dream, a small patch of earth by a spring that never dried, where water meant life and peace had a place to rest. His father's words still rode with him, "Where there's water, there's a future." That was creed enough for Cole. Tonight he was tracking a lone buckskin Mustang that had broken from its herd. The tracks were fresh, leading him toward the narrow cut of Bitterwash, a place that usually lived up to its name. But rain had come recently, and the wash might hold pockets of silver water. Cole moved like smoke, every motion deliberate, every sound swallowed by the desert. Then he heard it. Not a coyote's cry, not the wings of a nighthawk. A woman's voice, soft trembling and utterly out of place in the wilderness. For a heartbeat, he thought it might be a spirit, the ghost of water itself. He froze, listening, froze. The song drifted across the wash, tender and lonely, fragile as a moth's wing beneath the moon. Curiosity pulled him forward. He crept to the ridge where moonlight turned the shallow pools below into liquid silver. And there, standing waist-deep in the largest pool, was a woman. Her back was to him, her skin pale enough to drink the light, her dark hair spilling down like a curtain of midnight. She moved slowly, tiredly, bathing as if trying to wash away the world. The song faltered into silence. Cole knew he should turn back. A white woman alone out here meant trouble, the kind that could get a man killed. But then she sobbed just once, soft and broken. The sound struck him harder than any bullet, so he stayed hidden in the brush, watching like a ghost, keeping vigil. Her name, though he didn't know it yet, was Lily Moore. She had been walking for days, guided only by the North Star and a desperate need to escape. She had fled Colorado, and a husband named Silas Crane, a man with a silver fortune, and a soul as cold as the metal he dug from the mountains. To him, Lily had been just another possession, a fragile ornament to display and control. The last time his hand struck her, something inside her had shattered free. She'd taken what little she could, a few coins, a plain dress, a crust of bread, and ran. A freighter named Bill Turner had given her a short ride south, before turning back on his route, leaving her with a canteen of water and directions toward a town called Santa Esperanza Hope. It felt like a cruel joke now. Still, as she washed in the moonlit pool, the cool water eased her fear for the first time in days. She had never been so alone, and never so free. The song she hummed was one her mother had sung long ago, a tune of lost love and faraway dreams. Tears mingled with the water on her cheeks. As she stepped to the edge of the pool, her foot slipped on a slick rock. She gasped, falling with a splash pain twisting through her ankle, and before she could cry out again, a shadow broke from the brush, a tall, lean figure, moving with the quiet grace of a predator. An Apache. Her heart slammed in her chest. Was this how it ended after all her running? Cole reached her in 2 strides. He saw the terror in her eyes, blue and wide under the moon. He turned his gaze aside, fixed on the opposite bank, and knelt. His hands were steady strong as he lifted her from the water, as though she weighed no more than a child. He set her gently on the sandy bank, stepping back at once and turning away to give her space. Without a word, he shrugged off his rough wool coat and held it out to her, his gaze fixed firmly on the ground. Lily blinked, her breath catching. He wasn't attacking, he was helping. Her body trembled from cold and shock as she reached for the coat, her fingers brushing his. His skin was warm, solid grounding. She pulled the heavy fabric around her, the coarse weave scratching her skin but bringing strange comfort. It smelled of sagebrush campfire and horse-clean, wild scents that belonged to him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Cole turned his head, finally meeting her eyes. Her face was pale, but strong, framed by damp strands of dark hair. Everything about her, the delicate lines, the way she held herself, even in fear, spoke of someone raised far from this land. "You're hurt," he said simply. His voice was low, rough, but his English smooth, softened by the rhythm of his people. "My ankle," she managed. She looked down, already swelling. He knelt, movements smooth and sure. His hands were careful, impersonal, but gentle as he pressed around the joint. "Not broken," he said, "but you won't walk tonight." Rising, he added, "There's a fire not far from here." Lily hesitated. Every story she'd ever heard about Apaches screamed at her to stay away. But the calm strength in his posture, the quiet respect he had shown, didn't fit those stories. And she was freezing hurt and utterly alone. "All right," she said softly. He nodded once. They moved carefully through the dark until he stopped under an overhanging rock. He built a small fire, quick and clever, feeding it with dry wood that gave almost no smoke, a scout's fire. Warm light flickered over his face, sharpening the lines of his jaw, softening the rest. He handed her a piece of hard corn cake and a strip of dried meat. No ceremony, no words. She ate, surprised at her own hunger. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the pop of the fire and the deep breathing of the desert. "You've got no horse," Cole said at last. "No supplies." "I lost them." Lily lied the words, clumsy on her tongue. "Who are you traveling with?" he asked. "No one." He studied her for a moment, the firelight reflected in his eyes. A woman alone. That made her situation worse than he'd thought. Trouble followed a woman like her through this country, and trouble spread fast. Still, he couldn't leave her. The desert had its own laws: share water, respect life, and don't turn your back on someone who'll die without help. His people had taught him that long before the army ever tried to teach him anything else. In the morning, he said flatly, "I'll take you to Cedar Spur. There's a trading post there. You can find your way from that point." Lily looked up at him through the wavering glow. The fire softened the hard lines of his face, turning them almost kind. Almost. But what she saw there was enough strength, decency, a promise kept. "Thank you," she said again, and this time her words carried everything she meant: hope, relief, and the smallest spark of trust. The next day was long and punishing. Cole found her a sturdy branch to use as a crutch and walked ahead, rifle in hand, his pace slowed to match hers. He didn't speak, and she didn't press him to. The sun hammered down from a white sky, baking the world into shades of rust and bone. By the time they reached Cedar Spur, the place looked less like a town and more like something the desert hadn't finished swallowing, a cluster of low adobe buildings clinging to a patch of dust and heat. The air reeked of whiskey sweat and horses. A few half-starved animals swayed at the rail. On the porch of the main building, a handful of men stopped talking and stared. Their eyes tracked Lily, slow and hungry. She tightened Cole's coat around herself, lowering her head, as if that could hide her. Cole's jaw set. He knew this kind of crowd, men rotted by boredom and cheap liquor, the kind who saw violence as a way to pass time. And he knew with a sharp twist in his gut that trouble was already waiting for them here. He steered Lily toward the trading post, his face unreadable. Inside, the air was cooler but thick with leather tobacco and flour. A burly man in a stained apron tended the counter, yet it was another figure seated alone at a corner table who drew Cole's eye. Wiry and sun-baked, his clothes threadbare, but his gun belt cared for, he watched them with pale, steady eyes. A bounty hunter, Cole thought. The man's gaze kept flicking to Lily. Before Cole could move, one of the porch ruffians swaggered in with two cronies. Big and drunk on his own bravado, he boomed into the quiet room. "Well now, look what the Apache dragged in. Found you a pretty thing out in the sage, Chief." Lily flinched. Cole stepped forward, putting his body like a shield between her and the men. He said nothing, his silence heavier than any threat. The bully pressed on. "What's wrong?" "She don't speak English. Bet I could teach her a few words." He loped closer, a greasy grin on his face. Cole knew the flair of trouble. A brawl here would solve nothing and invite the wrong sort of notice, especially from the man in the corner. He had to stop it on terms those men would respect. He turned his head fractionally, meeting the big man's stare with dark, calm eyes. His voice, low and controlled, sliced through the room. "Be careful what you say," Cole said. "You're talking about my wife." The words dropped into the hush, heavy and unexpected. The big man blinked, his grin faltered. The others shifted uneasily. Lily's breath hitched. She stared at Cole's back, stunned by the claim his wife. The corner man, the bounty hunter, leaned forward, curiosity sharpening. Wade Bishop Cole, read in a flicker, had come on a rumor. A high society wife from Colorado gone missing, a reward posted by Silas Crane. A woman with red hair. The woman hunched in the cloak, wore her hat low, but a copper thread flashed in the light. The bully muttered then, after a beat, backed away with his crew. In those parts, even an Apache's wife carried a kind of off-limits. Cole turned from the stunned Lily, ignoring the hunter's fixed stare, and bought flour, coffee, and bandages. As he settled payment, he felt Wade Bishop's eyes on his back. The lie had bought them a pause, but it had painted a new target. Outside, the heat pressed closer. A coyote's distant call felt like a warning. "Why say that?" Lily asked in a fierce whisper. "It's the only word they'll hear," Cole answered, scanning the street. "Now we must go. You were going to leave me here," she said. "I can't," he said, jaw tight. "That man inside, he's a hunter. I think you're what he's after." At that moment, Wade Bishop swung from the threshold, eyes never leaving them. He tipped a slow, knowing smile that never reached his cold stare. "You take good care of your new bride, Apache," he called faux politeness dripping. "Pretty thing like that one'd want to keep her." He looked straight at Lily, drinking in the copper hair. "This ain't over," he muttered low enough for only them. Then he mounted and rode off, not fast, but with a purpose that put a chill in Cole's spine. Cole watched until the dust swallowed him. The main trails were no longer safe. The lie had bought time, but it had bound them together. He looked at Lily, at the fear and confusion in her eyes. "There are other trails," he said quietly but firmly. "Apache trails. He won't find us there." In that moment he decided her trouble was his. He would lead her away, not toward the next trading post, but through the country he knew, back roads and hidden paths only he could read. The land stretched before them, vast and merciless, a country that would either shield them or swallow them whole. Cole still didn't know her name, or where she'd come from, yet he'd called her his wife, and in the desert's harsh law that made it truth enough. They left behind the dust and whiskey stench of Cedar Spur, trading wagon ruts for a trail that seemed to whisper its way across the earth. Cole moved at a steady ground-eating pace. Lily followed her world shrinking to the sight of his broad shoulders and the dull ache pulsing in her injured ankle. The land they crossed now was wilder, more secretive. White men's trails hugged water and open ground, but Apache trails were different, woven into the bones of the desert, a language of shadow and stone. Cole led her over ridges that looked impossible, then down into canyons so narrow the sky became a ribbon overhead. At first, fear clutched her gut like a cold hand. Every rustle of dry brush, every whisper of wind sent panic running through her veins. She was a woman of Boston, of gas lamps and polished marble, and this world of thorns, dust, and endless horizon was like walking on another planet. Her once fine shoes were torn, her dress shredded and smeared with grit. Piece by piece, the desert stripped her down, leaving behind something raw and real she'd never known before. Cole noticed everything, but said little. When her ankle gave out and she crumpled onto the gravel, scraping her hand, he didn't rush to comfort her. He simply waited. When she finally stood again, biting her lip against the sting, he pointed to a rough, fibrous plant nearby. The bark, he said, evenly chew it into a paste. Keeps wounds clean. He showed her tearing a strip of bark and chewing it before pressing it over a small cut on his arm. Then he handed her another piece. Out here, pity was worthless. Survival was the only kindness worth learning. Days bled together beneath a pitiless sun. She learned to read the desert in small, hard-won lessons. The shimmer of cottonwood leaves meant water close to the surface. The tilt of creosote blossoms could tell the time. She learned to walk with her eyes scanning the horizon, reading the faint scars of trails, the subtle changes in the dirt, what Cole called the desert's handwriting. One afternoon, when their canteens were almost empty, they rested under the sparse shade of a palo verde. Cole cut open the thick leaf of a yucca plant and held it up, catching the light. "This one wears the morning dew," he explained, scraping the moisture into a gourd cup. "White men call it Spanish dagger. My people call it the hand of the sky. Gives what it can." The few drops barely wet her lips, but the taste was life itself. It was in these small moments that her old world began to dissolve. The rules that once shaped her how to pour tea, how to smile, just so meant nothing out here. When water and shade were miracles, manners seemed like foolish ghosts. Their talk came slowly, born of necessity. "We rest here," he'd say. "Yes," she'd answer, her voice faint. But later, as twilight painted the rocks with firelight, curiosity began to stir between them. "You don't speak like the other army scouts I've met," she said one evening, while they shared a skinny rabbit he'd caught. He turned the meat over the flame eyes, reflecting the fire. I listened. Most of them only talked. Most of John. You mean they only talked? She corrected gently, her Boston polish slipping through. That rare spark of humor crossed his face, a hint of a smile. Out here, he said, the only grammar that matters is water. For the first time in a long while, Lily smiled, a real smile, unmeasured and alive. I suppose it is. After a pause, she asked softly, Why did you leave them, the army? The warmth faded from his face. He stared into the flames, his voice flat. They wanted me to lead them against my own. I took their pay to guide them, not to help them kill my kin. The words hung between them, heavy as stone. She saw something in him than a man caught between two worlds belonging to neither. That night, under a sky thick with stars, her own ghosts returned. The voices of her upbringing, her father, her pastor, her society whispered in her head. A lady never travels alone with a man, least of all a savage. A wife's duty is to her husband, no matter how cruel he may be. She should go back, beg Silas Crane's forgiveness, fall to her knees, and repent. But then she saw his face in her mind, those cold, lifeless eyes, and every instinct screamed that she would rather die out here, beneath the endless desert sky, than ever belong to him again. Cold fury flashed through Lily at the memory of Silas Crane's hand clamped around her arm, the iron weight of his control. That same fire now burned inside her, fierce and alive. Whatever it took, she would survive. She would keep walking. She would keep following this quiet, capable man who had, for reasons she couldn't yet fathom, chosen to protect her. The sandstorm struck without warning. One moment the sky was a pure, endless blue. The next the horizon turned a sickly yellow, and the wind began to howl through the canyons like a living thing. Cole stopped dead, nostrils flaring. "We need shelter," he barked, his voice cutting through the rising storm. He caught her hand, strong, unyielding, and pulled her along as the wind clawed at them. They scrambled up a rocky slope toward a shallow cave carved into the cliffside. They had barely made it inside before the desert outside vanished in a screaming wall of dust and wind. The roar was deafening, a physical force that rattled the ground. Sand as fine as flour slipped through every crack, coating their skin, their clothes, their hair. They pressed themselves into the deepest part of the cave, shoulders brushing. Hours passed in that darkness, an intimacy forced by the fury of nature, silent and raw. When at last the wind began to falter, Cole pulled the cork from his canteen. Lily saw even in the dimness that it was almost empty. Without a word, he held it out to her. Her gaze flicked from the canteen to his face, his lips cracked, his skin gray with exhaustion. She took one tiny sip, then handed it back. He met her eyes and nodded once, a wordless exchange of respect. He drank and closed the canteen. Something changed in that moment, something simple but profound. They were no longer a white woman and an Apache, no longer fugitives bound by necessity. They were just two souls keeping each other alive. When the storm finally broke, the desert smelled reborn, scoured clean, sharp and alive again. Lily breathed it in, feeling the same stirring within herself, a quiet renewal, a sense of possibility. That evening, under the soft glow of their campfire, she knew she owed him truth, or something close to it. She reached into a hidden seam of her torn petticoat and pulled out a small folded square of deerskin. It was old soft from years of handling, marked in charcoal with trembling lines. "When I first ran," she said, voice low, "I got sick, a fever. I don't remember how long I was out. When I woke up, I was in a hut. An Apache woman was caring for me." Cole's hand stilled on the knife he'd been sharpening. His dark eyes lifted sharp and focused. "She gave me herbs water, Never told me her name. When I was strong enough to leave, she handed me this. Lily unfolded the deerskin map carefully, her fingers trembling. She said it was for her son, that he'd understand it. She told me that if I ever lost my way, I should follow it. It would lead to safety. Cole reached out his steady hands, suddenly uncertain. He took the map, staring at the lines. His thumb brushed a symbol, 2 rocks drawn one atop the other. His breath caught. Cache Rock, he murmured, voice roughened with disbelief. He looked at her then, and for the first time she saw something break inside him, a deep, aching sorrow. These markings. This is my mother's hand. Mara Redhawk. She was a healer. A midwife. The words settled between them like sacred dust. What had seemed a coincidence now felt like fate, a thread binding their lives long before they met. The kindness that had once saved Lily had come from his mother's hands. Their journey was no longer about escape. It had become a pilgrimage to something greater, something waiting for them both. For 2 more days, they followed the map through the desert's quiet heart. The bond between them deepened, forged not by words, but by shared endurance. Cole barely glanced at the map. His memory guided them. Cache Rock rose from the horizon like a monument, a towering red stone formation where one massive boulder balanced precariously atop another, watching over the plains like a sentinel. At its base, hidden beneath a tangle of juniper, Cole knelt and began to move the smaller stones aside. Beneath them lay a hollow, cleverly hidden. From it, he drew a leather pouch, darkened by age, the rawhide still tight. They sat together on the warm ground as he loosened the knot. Inside were objects packed with care, preserved by time and dust. First, he lifted a small leather-bound journal, its pages filled with his mother's graceful handwriting, a blend of Apache symbols and Spanish words. The faint, dry scent of herbs clung to every page. Then came a bundle of folded papers, official documents brittle with age. He unfolded them, his brow furrowing as he read. Lily leaned closer, her breath catching as her eyes traced the name written there. Not Catherine Moore, as she'd thought, no. The name was something else entirely. He looked closer. The first name was smudged, but it was unmistakable, Lily Moore. Beneath it was a description widow of mixed heritage born in the territory. It wasn't just a name. It was a new life, crafted by someone wise enough to know that a woman might one day need to disappear, to shed her past, and begin again. Cole stared at it, his pulse thrumming. His mother, Mara Redhawk, had prepared this left behind a second chance for someone she might never meet. And somehow it had found its way to Lily. Out here, in the wild heart of nowhere, it felt like divine intervention or something even older. At the bottom of the pouch, a small piece of tanned hide lay folded tight. Cole opened it carefully. On it, in his mother's familiar hand, were just 5 Spanish words. His voice caught as he translated low and rough. Choose your family with your heart. The words hung in the quiet air, heavy with meaning. As the sun sank, Cache Rock glowed in the last light, orange, bleeding into purple shadows stretching long. It felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. For Cole, this was a conversation across time, a mother's wisdom carried by wind and fate. For Lily, it was the first spark of a future she hadn't dared to dream. They had come here fugitives. They left as something else, 2 people tied by a legacy neither fully understood. The pouch weighed heavy in Cole's hands, filled not just with relics, but responsibility. His mother's message was clear: some gifts come wrapped in duty. The name on those papers, Lily Moore, widow of mixed blood, wasn't just coincidence. It was a key, a doorway out of the hunted life she'd known. Mara had foreseen need before it ever came, leaving behind a lifeline disguised as an identity. As they moved on from Cache Rock, the silence between them changed. No longer the wary quiet of strangers, but the reflective hush of two souls walking toward an uncertain shared horizon. The desert was still cruel, but now it held purpose. They couldn't live off the land forever. They needed salt ammunition and supplies if they were to reach Santa Esperanza, holy. Hope. The town's name whispered like a promise. The nearest outpost was Bitter Springs, larger than Cedar Spur and twice as dangerous. But need drives all living things, and necessity knows no fear. By midday, Bitter Springs shimmered beneath a punishing sun, a cluster of adobe buildings warped by heat and dust. The air thudded with the steady ring of a blacksmith's hammer, the dull murmur of voices, the scuff of boots on hard-packed dirt. As they walked the lone street leading a sturdy pony Cole had bartered for, with a tanned hide, Lily could feel every pair of eyes on them. A white woman and an Apache man. It wasn't just gossip material. It was fuel for trouble. Cole's hand hovered near his Colt, his eyes scanning doorways and shadows with calm precision. He moved like a man who'd lived too long expecting ambushes and usually found them. Then he saw him. Wade Bishop leaned against the wall of the general store as if he'd been carved there by the sun itself. He wasn't alone. 2 other drifters flanked him. Mean-eyed and restless, the kind of men who'd sell their souls for whiskey or coin. Wade's grin spread slow wolfish. He stepped forward, his voice slick as oil. Well now, look what the desert dragged back. The happy couple right on schedule. I was just telling my boys here about you two, hell of a love story. His men fanned out hands, twitching near their guns. It was a trap clean, simple, and deadly. Cole stopped cold, placing himself squarely between Lily and the bounty hunter. We've got no business with you, he said evenly, his voice low and dangerous. Oh, but I think you do, Wade purred, tipping his hat in mock respect. His pale eyes cut to Lily. Ma'am, forgive the rough manners back at Cedar Spur. Name's Wade Bishop. I've been hired by your husband, Mr. Silas Crane, to see you home safe. The man's worried sick. Lily's stomach turned at the sound of Silas's name. It felt like poison in her veins. Wade's tone was all false gentility, the kind that hid fangs behind a smile. He wasn't just talking to her. He was weaving a story for every watching eye on that street. In his tale, he was the rescuer. Cole was the savage kidnapper. Now don't be scared, ma'am. Wade went on, voice dripping with counterfeit concern. You've been taken from your life, dragged through hell by this creature. But it's over now. We'll take you home. That was the turning point. The old Lily, the Boston lady, bound by manners and fear, would have shrunk beneath the weight of those lies. But that woman was gone, buried somewhere back in the dust and fire of the desert. Now, another part of her, a wilder, stronger part, was about to rise. But the woman who had crossed the desert beside him, the one who'd learned to draw water from a cactus and tend her own wounds, was no longer that fragile lady from Boston. She carried a new name now, one gifted in a leather pouch, and sealed by fate. Lily Moore. A name that meant freedom if she was brave enough to claim it. Before Cole could speak, before his hand could even find the butt of his revolver, Lily stepped out from behind him. Calm, poised, fearless. She placed a steady hand on his arm, a silent claim, a gesture that spoke louder than any bullet. Then she lifted her chin and met Wade Bishop's cold, gray stare. There must be some mistake, sir. she said, her voice clear and steady enough to slice through the dusty air. "My husband is standing right here." She tightened her hold on Cole's arm. "I am Mrs. Red Hawk, and we were just on our way to buy supplies." For one stunned heartbeat, Wade's grin faltered. His men blinked, thrown off balance. Of all the reactions he'd expected, fear, pleading, tears, this cool defiance wasn't one of them. The sight of a white woman claiming an Apache husband turned the story upside down, and he didn't like being the fool in it. Cole didn't waste the moment. While Wade and his hired guns stood confused, he turned to the cantina doorway where Gus Moreno, the barkeep, was watching. The older man's sharp eyes missed nothing. In smooth, fluent Spanish, Cole spoke quickly. "Amigo," he said, voice calm but firm, "these men mean trouble. My wife and I wish no harm to your town. Please keep the women and children inside. No one else needs to bleed for their stupidity." Gus nodded once, vanished inside, and within seconds his voice thundered orders in Spanish. Shutters slammed, doors bolted. The air changed. In a blink, the crowd's sympathy had shifted. Cole Red Hawk was no longer a nameless Apache. He was a man protecting his wife. The bounty hunter and his thugs were now the invaders. Wade's temper cracked, his sneer twisting into something uglier. "Nice little show," he spat. "But it doesn't change who you are. You're Lily Moore, Edwin Whitcomb's runaway wife, and you're coming with me. The law's on my side." Cole's voice dropped to a deadly calm. "The law doesn't give you the right to threaten another man's wife." "She ain't your wife," Wade barked, rage breaking through his practiced control. "She's property, his property, and I'm here to collect." That was when the twitchy one on Wade's left decided to make his move. His hand dropped toward his pistol too slow. Cole's draw wasn't flashy or fast in the showman's sense. It was something deeper, instinctive, like the desert itself moving through him. 2 shots cracked near simultaneous thunderclaps. The first man howled, clutching a shattered knee as he dropped into the dust. The second spun sideways, a red bloom spreading across his shoulder, his gun skittering away. Cole hadn't aimed to kill, just to end it. Each shot was deliberate, precise, and final. Now, his revolver leveled steady at Wade Bishop's chest. The bounty hunter froze mid-motion, hand hovering uselessly above his gun, his face pale beneath the dirt. The silence that followed was thick as lead. The only sound was the whimper of the wounded. Doors slammed shut. Pale faces stared from darkened windows. Cole had won, but he knew what that meant. He'd proven the very thing the world expected of him, an Apache, with a gun, a white man bleeding in the street. When the law came, they wouldn't ask who drew first. "You're a dead man, Red Hawk." Wade hissed, his voice trembling with hate. Maybe Cole said quietly, "But not today, and not by you." He tipped his chin toward the cantina. "Leave your men's pay with the barkeep. Then ride." Wade's jaw clenched fury, twisting every line of his face. But the gun in Cole's steady hand left him no choice. Slowly he backed away, never breaking eye contact. Then he swung up onto his horse and spat into the dirt. "You can't hide forever, Apache," he snarled. And with a sharp kick he was gone, dust trailing like smoke from a dying fire. Cole holstered his weapon, took the pony's reins, and gripped Lily's arm. "We're leaving. Now." They rode hard from Bitter Springs, the desert wind stinging their faces. Behind them, the town shrank into the horizon, a place that had promised safety, but delivered only blood and warning. Ahead, the mountains loomed blue and distant. The road was uncertain, but there was no turning back now. Not for either of them. By the time they stopped, the last light of day had burned itself out across the desert, leaving the land steeped in bruised gold and shadow. The truth settled over them like the cooling dust. They were fugitives now. Wade Bishop wouldn't quit. Men like him never did. He'd spin his tale to the nearest marshal, say he'd tried to rescue a kidnapped lady from a savage's ambush, and Silas Crane's money would make sure everyone believed it. "We can't keep running forever," Lily said, her voice thin with exhaustion. The rush of adrenaline had long since drained away, leaving her trembling and hollow. "Sooner or later they'll catch up." Cole stared into the darkness, his jaw tight. "You're right," he said quietly. "What we need isn't another hiding place. We need sanctuary." He looked over at her, his eyes unreadable. "There's a mission, San Miguel. It's a hard ride, but Father Amos runs it. He knew my mother. He's a man who follows God's law, not the territories." As if summoned by the thought, a sound drifted toward them on the cooling breeze, a bell distant and pure, its melody rising like a prayer over the endless land. In that moment, the sound felt like a promise. Hope, thin but real, cutting through the dust and fear. It took them 3 days to reach San Miguel. When it finally came into view, it seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light, its white adobe walls standing like a vision against the red earth and wild sage. The place felt timeless, carved out of faith and sweat, rather than violence. Father Amos was just as Cole had described him, weathered and lean, his skin the color of sun-baked leather, his eyes sharp and kind. He greeted Cole with open arms, calling him mi hijo, and looked to Lily with a gentle curiosity, taking in her torn dress, her weary stance, the way she stood close to Cole, as if the space between them was the only safety left in the world. He led them into his study, a cool refuge filled with the scent of wax and old books. They told him a carefully trimmed version of the truth of danger and pursuit of a powerful man's reach. They left out the lies, the half-claimed marriage, the blood spilled along the way. When they finished, Father Amos was silent for a long time. His eyes moved between them, one fierce and wounded, the other trembling but unbroken. He saw the truth neither dared to say aloud, a man carrying a burden of honor, and a woman clawing her way back to freedom. "The law of this territory," the priest said at last, his voice soft but grave, "is a poor thing bought and sold like cattle. And your Mr. Crane is a man of means." He leaned forward, his gaze firm. "You have my word. You will have sanctuary within these walls." The relief that washed over Lily was so sudden, it nearly buckled her knees. "But understand this," Father Amos went on. "These walls are only clay and straw. They can keep out the sun, but not a marshal's badge. Sanctuary can protect you for a time, nothing more." He folded his weathered hands on the table. "If you truly wish to be free of this man, if you want his claim over you broken, then sanctuary alone will not suffice." He paused, letting the weight of his next words fill the silence. In the eyes of both God and the law, there is only one bond stronger than a husband's claim. His gaze held theirs. Another marriage. The words struck like a hammer blow, not loud, but final. Lily felt her breath catch. To escape one prison by stepping into another, it was a cruelty almost beyond imagination. She turned toward Cole. His expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw twitched, a flash of something raw. He was a man who prized his freedom as fiercely as air itself. Father Amos gave them space to think, pouring 3 small cups of cool water with slow, steady hands. "It is not a matter of affection," he said gently. "It is protection, a matrimonio por necesidad, a marriage of necessity. The Church permits it when life or soul is in danger, and the territory will recognize it. Once it's recorded, Silas Crane's claim over you ends. A woman cannot be another man's wife when she already has one." Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "And what does such a marriage require?" "Only vows," the priest said simply. "Before me and 2 witnesses. Your names entered into the mission ledger. I will send word to Santa Fe myself. Then my children. Your bond will be beyond the reach of any man's money." It was done. The decision once spoken became as real as the sun-baked adobe walls around them. They stepped out of Father Amos's study into the courtyard, where the afternoon light spilled through the arches and stretched long shadows across the worn stones. Far in the distance, the Sierra Blanca mountains glimmered beneath a haze of gold, their highest peaks still brushed with snow that refused to melt even under the desert's wrath. The sight stirred something deep in Lily, a memory of innocence she thought she'd long buried. Cole led her to a weathered stone bench beneath a twisted olive tree. For a long while, neither spoke. The only sounds were the low hum of bees and the quiet sigh of wind through the courtyard. Finally, his voice broke the silence, low, rough, and certain. "He's right," Cole said. "Wade Bishop won't stop. And Silas Crane's silver can buy 100 more guns to chase us. They'll hunt you, and because you're with me, they'll hunt me too." He turned toward her, his eyes dark and steady. "This is the only way to make their chase illegal. To them, you'd no longer be his property. You'd be my wife. That's a line they won't cross so easily." Lily's heart trembled at his words. "And you?" she asked softly. "What of your freedom, your land?" "Land won't do me much good if I'm buried under it," he replied, his tone sharp and practical. "And freedom means nothing if I leave you to the wolves. My mother saved your life, that's a debt. I called you my wife once to keep you safe, that's a promise. My path's tied to yours now." He looked back toward the mountains, their peaks glowing like embers in the sunset. "It's just paper," he said quietly. "A trick of law. Nothing else has to change." But she knew better. He was offering more than protection, he was offering her a name, a chance to live. It was the purest kind of honor, given freely, without expectation. She thought of her first wedding years ago in Boston, a gilded cathedral, perfumed air, and vows that had been nothing more than a contract. She'd been sold that day, a beautiful piece of property traded between powerful men. Now, standing in a dusty courtyard, 1,000 miles from everything she'd known, she was being offered something entirely different, a choice. "All right," she said finally, her voice steady. "I'll do it." The next evening, the mission chapel flickered with candlelight. The air was cool and smelled faintly of beeswax and desert blooms. There were no guests, no music, only 2 witnesses, Gus Moreno, the old cantina keeper, who had warned them of Bishop's return, and a gentle nun named Mother Agnes, her hands folded in quiet reverence. Lily wore a simple dress the nun had mended for her. Her copper hair, once a beacon for hunters, was braided and pinned up neatly. Cole stood beside her, no longer in his trail-worn buckskins, but in a clean white shirt and dark trousers. In the soft light, he seemed taller, almost noble. Father Amos spoke the words of the ceremony in a blend of Latin and Spanish, his voice a calm river through the stillness, and when it came time for the rings, Lily's heart caught there were none. But the priest smiled and produced a small silver band inlaid with a turquoise stone. "A gift," he said gently. "Silver from the earth, turquoise from the sky, a reminder of the bond between both." Cole took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. The metal was cool against her skin, and his touch was warm grounding. When it was her turn, she simply laid her hand over his, no words, just the quiet weight of trust between them. They signed their names in the thick leather ledger Cole Redhawk and Lily Moore, the name his mother had once prepared for her. With the scratch of a quill, Eliza Whitcomb ceased to exist. That night they were given a small, clean room at the far end of the mission. A single bed, a washstand, and a window open to the silver-strewn sky. The silence between them was thick, fragile. They were husband and wife by law, yet strangers bound by circumstance and danger. Cole stood at the window, his shoulders outlined by moonlight, while Lily sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The walls felt too close, the air too still. Old fears stirred inside her, the ghost of her first marriage, the dread that crept in whenever a door closed behind her. She had been a wife before, but never safe. When Cole finally turned from the window, the light carved his face into planes of shadow and silver. He took one step toward her, and Lily froze. No scream, no sound. Just the stillness of a woman caught between past terror and present mercy. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts, eyes fixed on some invisible point in the dark. It was a reflex born of survival, the kind of stillness that comes from years of enduring what cannot be escaped. Cole froze the instant he saw it. He didn't see just fear. He saw the quiet, terrible conditioning of someone who had learned that silence and stillness were safer than hope. He had seen it before, in the eyes of a horse broken too young, its spirit beaten into obedience. In that frozen moment, he understood. The purity he'd glimpsed in her that night by the wash had never been about innocence of the body. It was her soul. Her trust, her capacity for tenderness, had been stolen and locked away. Rage swelled inside him, not at her, but at the man who had done this. He had offered her his name as protection, but now he realized her wounds ran deeper than the reach of any law. He stepped back, slow and deliberate, giving her space. At the foot of the bed, he picked up a folded wool blanket and unfolded it with careful hands. Then, moving with the patience of a man approaching a frightened colt, he draped it over her shoulders. His touch was feather-light, impersonal, a gesture of comfort, not possession. He didn't speak for a long while. He returned to the window, letting distance be her safety. Then softly he said, "The stars look different out here." His voice was calm, low, a gentle current breaking the silence. "My people see stories in them. That bright one there that's the camp of the morning star, the one who brings the dawn. He's a warrior, but he waits. He's patient." Lily's rigid frame began to ease beneath the weight of the blanket. His voice steady and rich, wrapped around her like the warmth of the fire that wasn't there. "My father used to say, 'Love is like fire,'" Cole continued. His eyes stayed fixed on the heavens. "White men treat it like wildfire, burning fast, destroying everything it touches. But that ain't love. That's just hunger." He turned slightly, the starlight carving his profile into sharp, quiet strength. "Real love's a campfire. You build it careful, feed it right. Give it air when it needs to breathe, bank it when it needs to rest. Be careless, and it'll burn you. Forget it, and it'll die. But if you tend it, it'll keep you warm through the coldest nights." He said nothing more. The only sound left was her breathing, no longer shallow, but deep and tremulous, breaking with quiet sobs. A single tear slid down her cheek, then another, until the dam broke. She cried not the loud, panicked weeping of fear, but the low, wrenching release of someone who was finally allowed to grieve. She cried for the girl she had been, for every cruel touch and silenced scream, for the impossible kindness of the man across the room who did not demand, did not take, only waited. Cole didn't move to comfort her. He simply stood his watch steady and silent, a living promise that she was safe now. When at last her sobs faded into quiet exhaustion, he spoke again, his voice soft as the night air. "You're safe here, Lily," he said, calling her by name for the first time. "I won't harm you. You have my word." And she believed him. In that moment, the chains of her fear began to loosen link by link. From the ashes of a marriage born of necessity, something fragile and alive began to take shape. Husband and wife not by law, but by quiet understanding, by a promise made under moonlight. The next morning, Lily was changed. The night had burned away the last of the helpless woman she once was. She found Cole in the courtyard tightening the saddle straps on his horse. "My hair," she said firmly. "This color, it's too dangerous. The nuns use walnut husks to dye their wool. I'll ask them to teach me. I'll make it brown." He studied her for a moment, surprised, then nodded. "That's wise. I want you to teach me to shoot," she added, her gaze steady. "I won't be helpless again. I want to protect myself. Protect us." Cole hesitated, reading the resolve in her eyes. Then he nodded once. "I'll teach you." She drew a breath, her voice softer now. "And one more thing. Sister Grace weaves blankets for the mission. I want to learn from her. I need a skill. Something that's mine." Cole's eyes met hers, no longer seeing a frightened fugitive, but a woman reclaiming her strength one choice at a time. "If we're gonna make a life in Santa Esperanza," Lily said, her tone firm but calm, "I won't be a burden. I'll pull my weight." Cole looked at her, his wife, and felt a rush of admiration that nearly stopped his breath. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was standing tall, fighting for the life ahead of them. High above, the snow on the Sierra Blanca didn't melt, it gathered strength, waiting for its long descent. 2 days later, their fragile peace shattered. A young Pueblo boy came riding in with a message for Father Amos. The priest found them in the garden where Lily was learning to hold a revolver steady. The weight was strange in her hand, but not unwelcome. Father Amos's face was drawn, his voice heavy. "A letter from a friend in Tucson," he said. "Silas Crane has doubled the bounty on your head, Lily, and placed a new price on yours, Cole. He's hired a dozen more gunmen, Wade Bishop's leading them. And they're not just bounty hunters now, they've got a marshal riding with them and a federal warrant in hand." The words fell like stones in the quiet afternoon. The mission walls suddenly felt thinner, as if sunlight alone held them up. "You must go," Father Amos said, sorrow in every word. "Sanctuary ends when the law comes with a badge." Cole met Lily's eyes. Her face was pale, but her gaze held no fear, only resolve. She wasn't running from something anymore. She was running toward something, toward Santa Esperanza, toward a life they would build or die trying. The journey wasn't a flight. Now, it was a pilgrimage. They rode under the vast, merciless sky, not as hunted souls, but as seekers of their own destiny. The lessons of the mission stayed with them. Lily's fiery hair was now a deep chestnut, dyed with walnut husks, blending her into the dusty land around them. Each evening, by the campfire, Cole guided her through the rhythm of the revolver Father Amos had pressed into their hands. At first, the gun had felt alien, a cold, heavy stranger. But now, it was an extension of her will, a tool, not a fear. They spoke more easily along the trail, weaving their two worlds together. She told him of Boston, of gas-lit streets glowing in winter, and the hush of great libraries where dust danced in sunbeams. He told her of his youth among the mesas where the stars were teachers, and every animal had a language if you listened long enough. It was a meeting of two worlds, the East's measured time and the West's eternal rhythm. When they finally saw Santa Esperanza, it was a brown smudge against the far blue ridges. As they drew nearer, the smudge became a town that seemed to have grown straight out of the desert's bones. Weathered wood, faded adobe, a place that hadn't been built so much as become. Unlike Cedar Spur or Bitter Springs, those way stations of dust and desperation, Santa Esperanza felt alive. Smoke curled from chimneys, children's laughter mingled with the blacksmith's hammer, and the air was rich with the scent of chili horses and hot dust. The people were as mixed as the land itself. Anglo ranchers with weather-cracked faces, Mexican families who had tilled this soil for generations, Apache kin who'd chosen freedom on their own terms instead of the slow death of reservations. They mingled, argued, traded, and lived side by side. For the first time since fleeing Colorado, Lily didn't feel like an outsider. Here everyone was from somewhere else. Cole's first stop was the sheriff's office, a modest adobe building with one barred window and a sign that creaked in the wind. Inside, a man sat behind a scarred wooden desk, broad-shouldered and lined by years of desert sun. His eyes, though, were sharp as a hawk's. He looked up when they entered, gaze settling first on Cole, then on Lily, lingering on the turquoise and silver ring glinting on her finger. "Red Hawk," he said, voice low and steady. "Heard you were breaking mustangs up north." Cole gave a small nod. Plans changed. "Sheriff Clay Dalton, this is my wife Lily." Dalton rose and tipped his hat to her, a rare courtesy in these parts. "Ma'am," he said. Then he turned back to Cole. A silence passed between them, heavy with the kind of history that didn't need words. Once years ago, during a gunfight outside a canyon pass, Red Hawk had saved his life. And now fate had brought them face to face again, two men who owed each other more than either could ever say. Years ago, when Cole had been scouting for the army, he'd dragged a badly wounded Clay Dalton out of a ravine under a rain of bullets. The debt had never been spoken aloud, but it had never been forgotten either. "We're looking to stay," Cole said simply, now his voice calm but firm. "Find work, build a life." Sheriff Dalton leaned back in his chair, studying him in silence. He knew Cole Red Hawk's kind, steady proud, a man who lived by a code older than the law itself. "Santa Esperanza could use men like that. It always could. The council just approved funds for a deputy," Dalton said after a pause. "The pay's poor, the work's worse. And some of the ranchers here, well, they won't take kindly to an Apache wearing a star." He let the words hang there like dust in still air. Then, "But the offer's yours if you want it." It was more than an offer. It was a lifeline. A badge meant more than authority. It meant belonging. It meant a man hunted by warrants could stand in the open, no longer prey, but part of the law. "I'll take it," Cole said without hesitation. The news spread through Santa Esperanza like wildfire on a dry wind. To the Mexican and Apache families, it was a victory proof that a man's worth could outweigh his bloodline. But the powerful Anglo ranchers were less charitable. Jed Carter, one of the biggest landowners in the valley, made his feelings known in no uncertain terms. To him and his kind, the law was theirs to wield, not share. The lines were drawn quietly but unmistakably in the taverns, the church steps, and the whispers along Main Street. While Cole shouldered his new duty, Lily found hers. She saw the town's children, half-wild, bright-eyed, scattered across the dusty streets with no schoolhouse to anchor them. A daring idea took root in her heart. She went to Sheriff Dalton and Frank Dorsey, the general store owner, who also happened to serve as the town's unofficial mayor. "I want to start a school," she said, her voice steady, but her fingers tight around each other. "For all children, no matter who their parents are. They'll learn to read and write English, but they'll also learn the songs of their mothers, the stories of this land." Dorsey frowned, muttering about costs and politics, but Dalton saw in her eyes the same unyielding spark he'd seen in Cole's. "Do it," he said simply. They gave her a disused storeroom behind the general store. It wasn't much, but Lily turned it into something remarkable, a place where children from every color and creed sat side by side learning letters, songs, and respect. The school became a symbol of the town itself, a fragile bridge over old wounds. Cole and Lily rented a small adobe house at the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. For the first time, they ate from plates instead of tin mess kits, slept on sheets instead of blankets, and called a place home. Lily planted a tiny garden behind the house, coaxing stubborn desert roses from the cracked earth. In those quiet evenings, the smell of stew on the fire, the sound of wind through the mesquite, their marriage of convenience began to grow roots. Then, one scorching afternoon, the mail rider thundered in with a letter addressed to Mrs. Lily Moore, care of the sheriff's office. Her heart kicked in her chest when she saw the handwriting, elegant, careful, unmistakable. Ruth Hale, her mother's sister, back in Boston. The letter was short, but trembling with emotion. Ruth had received Lily's secret message smuggled out months earlier, and now she was coming west to find her. The past had found her again, not in violence this time, but in concern. The thought filled Lily with equal parts fear and longing. As summer deepened, the sky turned pitiless. No rain came. The earth cracked. Wells ran, low tempers lower still. Then came the lightning. A dry storm rolled over the Sierra Blanca, throwing forks of fire into the brittle grasslands. One strike was all it took. By dusk, a wall of flame was racing down the valley, orange and hungry, devouring everything in its path. Santa Esperanza erupted into chaos. Men shouted, women hauled buckets, but the blaze was a beast far beyond their control. The wind carried sparks like gunfire, and the horizon glowed as though hell itself had risen from the desert floor. Cole Redhawk's hand went to his badge, then to his horse. Duty, he knew, didn't wait for dawn. The fire came alive like a beast loosed from hell, roaring, snarling, devouring everything in its path. The sky turned black with smoke. The wind carried embers that rained like sparks from a forge. It was Cole Redhawk who brought order to the chaos. He wasn't just a deputy now, he was a man born of this land. He understood the wind's moods, the fire's hunger, the way the desert breathed. He rode to the front of the panicked mob, his voice cutting through the din like the crack of a whip. "Buckets won't stop this," he shouted. "We need a fire break now, Jed. Get your men and your plows. Start a trench from the creek bed to the ridge. Frank, gather every wet blanket and burlap sack we've got. We'll choke the edges." His commands came quick, clear, and absolute. No one argued, not even Jed Carter, who had cursed his name a week before. In the face of this shared enemy, prejudice burned away faster than dry brush. Cole fought shoulder to shoulder with them, his face streaked with soot eyes raw from smoke. For hours they battled the blaze together, the townsfolk forming a desperate, determined line under his lead. When the fire finally broke against the blackened strip of earth they'd carved, the town was still standing. The pastures were singed, but safe. The air stank of ash, but Santa Esperanza had survived. That night in Gus Moreno's saloon, men who once crossed the street to avoid him now slapped his shoulder and bought him drinks. Even Jed Carter walked up grim-faced, his hand extended. "Red Hawk," he said roughly. "I was wrong about you. You saved our hides today." Cole clasped his hand. It wasn't friendship, but it was something harder-earned respect. And in the West, respect meant survival. For a while, peace held. Lily's school thrived, the sound of children's laughter drifting through the desert air. Cole was no longer the Apache deputy. He was their deputy, their protector. Then one night, peace died as suddenly as it had come. A rider staggered into town long after dark, his horse white with sweat. It was Hank Morales, the old freighter, who'd once warned them at the mission. He nearly fell off his saddle as Cole caught him outside the sheriff's office. Inside, under the flickering lamplight, Hank's voice was grim. "Whitcomb's done playing the law," he said. "He knows the marriage record's filed. No more warrants. So he's gone and hired himself a private army." Cole's jaw tightened. "How many 20, maybe more? Wade Bishop's leading them." Hank leaned forward, tracing a line through the dust on Dalton's desk. "They're sitting out by Coyote Narrows 10 miles west on the Tucson Trail. It's the only pass through that stretch. They ain't coming to arrest you, Cole. They're planning to bury you." The room went quiet, except for the slow hiss of the lamp. Sheriff Clay Dalton leaned back heavy and grim. 20 men bought with Crane's money. Hell of a thing. Lily stood beside Cole, her hand resting lightly on his arm, not in fear, but in solidarity. The frightened woman she'd once been was gone. The desert had burned her fear away, left only steel. "We can't stay," Cole said quietly. "If they ride in the town, will pay the price. And you can't run," Dalton added. "They'll hunt you from here to the Rio Grande. Only one way through." Cole nodded slowly. "Then that's where we'll meet them." Dalton's eyes met his, hard and proud. "They'll expect you to run scared. Let 'em. That's when you hit 'em back." He turned toward the window, watching the sleeping town under the faint glow of the moon. "You're not just a hunted man anymore, Red Hawk," he said. "You wear that star. An attack on you is an attack on Santa Esperanza." And in that moment, the war that had been coming for months finally had a battlefield. Coyote Narrows was waiting. Sheriff Clay Dalton turned from the window, his face half lost in the lamplight. "I can't officially send you into an ambush," he said quietly, "but I can send a message. Tahoe Crow and his warriors are camped up in the Dragoon Mountains, less than a day's ride from the far side of the Narrows. He and I have an understanding, and he hasn't forgotten your brothers. The plan that followed was as desperate as it was brilliant, a trap within a trap. Cole Red Hawk and Lily Moore would ride out at dawn, acting as though they were bound for Tucson. They would ride straight into the ambush and hold as long as humanly possible, long enough for Tahoe and his men to circle in from the ridges. It was a wager of faith and endurance, the kind of gamble only those with nothing left to lose could make. 2 nights later, beneath a sliver of cold silver moon, they entered Coyote Narrows. The canyon swallowed them whole. Jagged cliffs rose on either side like walls built by angry gods, their shadows so deep they seemed to drink the starlight. The only sound was the soft rhythm of hooves on sand, and the faint trickle of a stream glinting like broken glass. Cole rode ahead, rifle laid across his lap, every sense stretched taut. He tasted the air, listened for what wasn't there, the silence between the night insects, the pause before the storm. Lily followed close behind her hand, brushing the revolver at her hip. Her heartbeat pounded not with terror, but with fierce, razor-edged focus. She was no longer prey. She was a fighter. The first shot came like lightning sharp, blinding absolute. A bullet tore past Cole's head, snapping rock beside him. Instantly, they were off their horses, moving as one. Cole fired back toward the flash high on the ridge, while Lily dragged the horses into a patch of scrub oak. "Stay low!" he called out, voice steady and commanding despite the chaos. "Move between the rocks! Don't give 'em a clean shot!" Gunfire erupted from every side, flashes sparking along the canyon rim like wildfire. They were boxed in, caught in a perfect killing ground. But Lily didn't panic. She pressed her cheek against the cold face of a boulder, hearing Cole's lessons whispering in her mind. "Breathe. Squeeze. Don't yank the trigger." She peeked out, spotted the shape of a man silhouetted against the skyline. She steadied her hands, exhaled, and fired. The revolver kicked hard. The man vanished behind the ridge. She didn't know if she'd hit him, but she'd made him dive for cover. That was enough. Cole moved through the shadows like a ghost, firing, shifting, vanishing. His shots were measured, surgical. He wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to survive. His bullets shattered rifles, grazed arms, splintered rock, anything to break their rhythm and buy more time. For long, breathless minutes, the canyon echoed with gunfire, ricochets, and shouted curses. Two people holding off an army. Their defiance burned against the darkness like a stubborn campfire, refusing to die. But the tide was turning. The enemy's numbers were too many, their fire too heavy. Each bullet came closer, each breath harder to take. They were running out of time. Then a voice, sharp, arrogant, and cruel, split the night. "Enough, I want her alive." From behind a jagged outcrop near the canyon floor, a figure stepped forward where no one should have dared to stand. The moon caught his face, pale and contorted with rage. Silas Crane. In his madness, he'd left his cover, his silver-inlaid pistol glinting like a toy in his trembling hand. "Lily," he bellowed, "this is over. You belong to me. No savage and no whore will make a fool of Silas Crane." The world seemed to slow. Cole saw him clear shot, dead center. His finger tightened on the trigger. Years of injustice, miles of running, every scar, every humiliation, all of it funneled into that one breath, that one moment. He could end it. All he had to do was pull the trigger. Vengeance was just a heartbeat away, one small pull of the trigger. Cole Redhawk had the rifle steady, the perfect shot lined up. But in that frozen moment, the gleam of the deputy's star caught his eye, glinting faintly in the moonlight. In it, he saw Santa Esperanza, the faces of its people, the town that had given him a place. And beyond that, he saw Lily Moore's eyes not filled with hate, but with fierce, protective love. He was not a killer. He was the law. Cole shifted his aim just a fraction. The rifle cracked sharp and final. Silas Crane's scream cut through the canyon, high and thin like tearing metal. The silver pistol flew from his grip, spinning into the dust as he fell to his knees, clutching a ruined hand, slick with blood. Then came another sound, a deep, thundering rhythm that rolled through the canyon walls. Not gunfire. Hooves. Bare hooves striking rock in perfect unison. From the shadows, riders surged forward, lean figures astride sure-footed ponies, their cries echoing like spirits of the wind. The Chiricahua Apache had come their charge, led by Tahoe Crow, his hawk-like face glinting beneath the moon. The tide turned in an instant. The ambush that had seemed unbreakable shattered like glass. Tahoe's warriors swept down the canyon with terrifying precision, a storm of motion and sound. Wade Bishop's hired guns, paid to bully not to die, broke ranks. Some dropped their weapons and begged for mercy. Others ran for the rocks, only to be hunted by the shadows they'd feared all their lives. Cole rose from cover smoke, clinging to his clothes dust, streaking his face. He crossed the ground between them, grabbed Silas Crane by the collar, and dragged him to his feet. Binding his wrists with rough rope, Cole met his gaze with grim calm. The fight was over. Moments later, Sheriff Clay Dalton arrived with a small posse, the lamplight from their torches flickering against the canyon walls. Tahoe reined in his horse beside Cole. No words passed between them, only a solemn nod, the kind shared by men who had once bled for the same ground. Justice had come to Coyote Narrow's Apache steel, and a lawman's badge standing side by side. As the prisoners were rounded up, Silas Crane gave a sudden, choking gasp. His skin turned ashen. One trembling hand clutched his chest. His heart, Dalton muttered, kneeling beside him. But it was too late. The poison in Crane's veins, the hate and greed that had driven him across miles of desert had finally consumed him. He collapsed into the dust, dead by his own corruption. Somewhere in the confusion, a figure slipped away into the darkness. A voice, harsh and cold, echoed through the rocks. "This ain't over, Red Hawk. I'll see you in hell before it is, Wade." Bishop was gone, his words a promise carved into the desert night. Cole pulled Lily into his arms, holding her close, as the echoes died. They were alive. They had survived. The creek beside them shimmered silver under the moon, a ribbon of light leading them out of death's shadow and back toward home. When they rode into Santa Esperanza days later, there were no parades, no cheering crowds, just a quiet, reverent respect. The story of the deputy and his wife spread like wildfire through the valley. Two souls who faced an army and lived not through luck but courage, faith, and the loyalty of friends. The captured gunmen were locked in the small-town jail bound for trial in Tucson. Word of Silas Crane's death followed soon after a fitting end whispered in every saloon and store. But each telling ended the same way, with a question spoken in low tones, "Where's Bishop?" The bounty hunter had vanished into the desert wind, leaving behind an unease that no victory could quiet. Life slowly found its rhythm again. Santa Esperanza healed. The air felt cleaner, the sun brighter. Cole's badge no longer marked him as an outsider. It was a symbol of earned respect. And Lily's little school had become the heart of the town, a place where Apache Mexican and Anglo children learned side by side, their laughter mingling like music across the dusty streets. One letter, though, still hung over them, a promise of change. Lily's Aunt Ruth Hale was coming west. The morning of her arrival, Lily could hardly keep still. She smoothed the front of her best calico dress for the 10th time, her hands trembling slightly. "She'll judge me," she murmured. "She'll see this town, this house. And she'll see you. She'll think I've lost my mind living like this." Cole looked up from where he was oiling his rifle, calm and steady. "Let her see," he said. "She'll see a woman who's strong, a woman who's happy. If she can't see that, then her eyes are the ones that are blind." When the stagecoach finally rattled into the dusty street, a plume of pale dust trailing behind it, a tall, refined woman stepped down every inch the image of Boston respectability. Ruth Hale had arrived. Ruth Hale was everything the stories from Boston had promised. Tall poised and sharp as a silver needle, she stepped from the stagecoach like a queen disembarking from her ship. Her traveling dress, dark gray silk immaculate, even after miles of dust, seemed to belong to another world entirely. Her silver hair was twisted into a flawless bun, her spine straight as a church steeple. Her gaze swept across the main street of Santa Esperanza. The adobe walls, the hitching posts, the wagons creaking under the afternoon sun, and her lips tightened into a line of faint, genteel disapproval. Lily Moore's stomach sank. But when Ruth's eyes met hers, the chill broke. For a heartbeat, the stern matriarch vanished, and in her place stood a woman overwhelmed with relief. "My dear child," she whispered, clasping Lily's hands tightly. "You're safe. That's all that matters." The reunion unfolded over tea in the small adobe parlor, where the mismatched furniture and cracked china looked fragile under Ruth's assessing gaze. Yet her voice softened as she listened, quiet intent, as Lily told her story. She spoke carefully, omitting the violence, the gunfire, the terror. She painted a picture of endurance and new beginnings. Ruth, who had spent a lifetime reading what was never said aloud, understood every silence. When the story ended, Ruth said nothing for a long while. Her eyes flicked to Cole Redhawk, who sat in the corner silent but steady. The same kind of quiet strength that makes a man dangerous when roused. She noticed the ring on Lily's finger, silver and turquoise, simple and honest. "When I was your age," Ruth began softly, "I loved a fisherman from Gloucester. My father forbade it, said he wasn't fit for our family. I did my duty and married a banker." She touched her gold wedding band, a perfect circle, cold and lifeless. "I've regretted it every day since. You, my dear, chose freedom. You chose life. Your mother would have been proud." The distance between them crumbled. Lily fell into her aunt's arms, tears soaking into the stiff silk of Ruth's dress. That night, Ruth unlocked a leather satchel and handed Lily a sealed envelope. "Your father left this. He felt he'd failed you in marrying that man. Before he passed, he changed his will. This is yours alone." Inside were deeds, signatures, and a small inheritance, modest, but enough. Enough to buy lumber books, maybe another classroom. Enough to make the Santa Esperanza bilingual school a reality. Weeks later, the sound of children's laughter and hammering wood filled the air. For the first time in years, hope had roots. Then came another gift, quieter, more precious. Lily was with child. For a time they kept it secret. It felt too sacred to speak aloud a promise between heaven and earth. But while Lily glowed with quiet joy, Cole grew restless. He watched the horizon, too often his nights spent standing by the window eyes, searching the desert. One evening, under the rising stars, Lily asked softly, "What are you afraid of?" Cole's voice came rough, torn from the depths. "Happiness like this. It feels dangerous. My people, we've lost too much. Every time something good comes, the world takes it back." His words carried the weight of generations of raids, loss, and the endless ache of survival. Lily could not soothe it. The next day, Ruth found him at the corral, mending leather straps with slow, deliberate care. "Eliza tells me you're to be a father," she said, her tone brisk. He nodded, silent. "And she says you're afraid." He didn't deny it. His eyes told the truth. Ruth's voice softened. "Her mother, my sister Margaret, was delicate, often ill, but her spirit was like a river, gentle, unstoppable, and stronger than stone. She loved fiercely, even when the world gave her every reason not to. Don't let fear steal that kind of love from you, Cole Redhawk." Her words lingered in the air long after she left, as the sun sank behind the mesas, and the wind carried the first whisper of winter through the desert. She carried warmth into every space she touched, even with her frail hands and soft-spoken words. Ruth Hale's stories of Lily's mother, Margaret, were like sunlight breaking through clouds. She reminded Cole that strength didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered through kindness, through art, through the courage to love. From Margaret's gentle poetry to his own mother, Mara Redhawk's fierce healing spirit, Ruth painted a portrait of endurance stretching across generations. You must honor that line. Ruth said, her eyes gleaming like starlight on the desert. Give this child a name that carries both their spirits, a name for the healer who saved her mother, and a name for the mother who taught her to see beauty, even in sorrow. That night, as Cole sat beside the flickering lamplight reading from Margaret's old book of poems, her words seemed to blend with Lily's soft breathing nearby. His gaze drifted to her, the curve of her belly, the quiet glow of life stirring beneath her hand, and a new kind of peace settled over him. The fear that had haunted his nights gave way to something steadier, deeper purpose. He wasn't just a deputy anymore. He was a guardian of something sacred. Out back, the desert roses Lily had planted, flowers that should have been long dormant in the chill, had suddenly burst into bloom. Their pale pink petals glowed against the hard, dry soil. They looked like defiance, made flesh, a stubborn beauty daring the desert to crush it. It felt like a blessing. A month later, the world intruded once again, quietly this time. The morning stage rolled into town carrying a man in a black suit, with the kind of stiffness that only government work can breed. He introduced himself as Mr. Fields, Bureau of Indian Affairs. He called a meeting in the general store. His papers were stacked neatly on the counter, his tone polished, official. The United States government, he announced, is offering opportunity to the Indian children of this territory. The Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania will take them in, teach them English, a trade, and Christian principles. They'll be lifted from their primitive circumstances and made fit for civilized life. His words dripped with self-righteous pride. Around him, Apache and Mexican parents stood in uneasy silence, eyes narrowing as he continued. All native children and those of mixed blood will attend. It is for their own good. The only way to save them from the blanket and the teepee is to teach them the American way. The words hit like stones. The silence that followed was suffocating. This man, this Mr. Fields, was more dangerous than any outlaw. He carried no gun, but his pen was sharper than steel. He came not to kill, but to erase. That evening, Santa Esperanza gathered in the half-built community hall. Lantern light flickered over faces drawn tight with fear and fury. Mr. Fields stood at the front, confident, rehearsed. He spoke of progress, of salvation through obedience, of turning Indian children into reflections of himself. When he finished, the room was silent. Then Lily rose to her feet, one hand resting protectively over her rounded belly. "Mr. Fields," she said clearly, her voice calm but unyielding. "You speak of saving children, but what kind of salvation teaches them to despise their own blood, to forget their parents, their songs?" Her gaze swept the crowd. Apache, Mexican, Anglo, all bound by the same rising anger. In my school, children learn English, yes, but they also learn the Apache names for the stars, the old Spanish songs that have lived in this valley for 100 years. We don't make them choose between a book and a blanket. We show them they can carry both. A murmur spread through the hall, a ripple of courage. Cole stepped beside her, his presence a silent wall of strength. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. "A plant dies when you cut it from its roots," he said simply. "A child is no different." Sheriff Clay Dalton pushed off the back wall and stepped forward, his voice low and steady. "Mr. Fields," he said, "this town stands under the law, and the law protects its people. These families aren't your wards. They're citizens. And as long as I wear this badge, no one's taken their children away." The hall erupted not in chaos, but in fierce, unified applause. For the first time since Mr. Fields had arrived, his confidence cracked. The desert, it seemed, still had a few things Washington couldn't tame. "They're citizens of Santa Esperanza," Sheriff Clay Dalton declared, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt. "And I won't stand by while their children are dragged off like cattle." Before the room could erupt again, another voice rang out from the doorway, measured firm, and filled with the authority of the cloth. Father Amos stepped forward, his black robes dusted from the trail. "The Lord commands us to honor father and mother," he said, his voice echoing against the timber walls. "To teach a child shame for his own blood is not salvation, it is sin. True education should guide a child's light home, not burn the bridge behind him." For a moment, even the bureaucrat's pen paused mid-air. Mr. Fields, ever the man of paperwork and power, straightened his jacket. "Your sentiments are duly noted," he said briskly, "but this is federal law. My authority." A crisp voice sliced through his words. "Do you indeed have that authority, sir?" Every head turned toward the back of the room. Ruth Hale stood there like a granite monument from Boston itself, tall, proud, and impossible to ignore. Because according to my correspondence with Senator Dawes and the War Department, she continued lifting a handful of telegrams, this initiative is voluntary, yet you seem intent on turning it into compulsory servitude. I assure you Washington will find that most illuminating. She laid the telegrams on the counter like cards in a winning hand. While the town had been preparing its moral defense, Ruth had been waging a quieter war, one fought in ink and influence. Her words had reached offices that Mr. Fields could only dream of stepping foot in. By nightfall, the town had turned its outrage into action. On the counter of Frank Dorsey's general store, they drew up a petition. Apache elders, Mexican merchants, and even Jed Carter and the Anglo ranchers, who once scorned Cole Redhawk, all signed their names side by side. In that moment, Santa Esperanza wasn't a patchwork town anymore. It was one voice. 2 days later, Mr. Fields climbed aboard the eastbound stagecoach, his face tight with fury. "This matter," he hissed, "is not finished." But everyone watching from the boardwalk knew better. The people had faced a different kind of gunfight, and won it with unity instead of bullets. As the cold of late autumn gave way to a soft, forgiving winter, life took root again. The new wing of the Santa Esperanza Bilingual School rose from the ground, built with lumber paid from Ruth's inheritance, hammered together by the hands of men and women who once eyed each other across divides of race and pride. And in the small adobe house at the town's edge, beneath the desert roses that refused to die, a cry broke through the night air. Lily Moore Redhawk had given birth to a daughter. She was perfect, pale as dawn, with eyes dark and steady as her father's. They named her Ilona Margaret, for the healer who had saved one mother, and the poet who had shaped another, a bridge between two worlds. Weeks later, under a silver moon, Cole wrapped the tiny girl in a soft blanket. He looked to Lily, and without a word they saddled their horses and rode out beyond the town's sleeping lights. The desert stretched before them, quiet, vast, eternal. They stopped at Bitterwash, the very place where their story had begun. The creek shimmered like molten silver under the moonlight. Cole stepped into the cool water boots, sinking into the soft sand. "This is where I first called you my wife," he said softly, his voice carrying over the rippling water. "Back then it was for survival. Tonight it's by choice. Ours." He looked down at their daughter's peaceful face, then at Lily, his voice breaking with quiet reverence. I took you as my Apache bride by fate. But in the mission when I saw your spirit untouched pure as mountain snow, I chose to wait, to let our time come as it should. Lily's fingers brushed his cheek. Because of you, Cole, she whispered, tears glistening like stars that snow didn't melt away. It became water life for the desert I was. He drew her close and kissed her. Above them a lone coyote howled a wild, haunting hymn of endurance. The scent of blooming desert roses drifted on the night air. The future was uncertain. Somewhere Wade Bishop still breathed his hatred waiting like a storm on the horizon. But for now, they were a family rooted in love, baptized in moonlight and unafraid of whatever dawn might bring. And that is where this tale leaves them standing in the water together, choosing life. Thank you for listening to their story. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.